And joining us today in our book talk segment, a woman who's written really a fascinating book, kind of about the industry we're in here in radio, called A Word from Our Sponsor, Ad Men, Advertising, and the Golden Age of Radio. We're joined today by Cynthia Meyer from New York City. She's an associate professor of communication at the College of Mount St. Mary in New York City, and she joined us by telephone today. And Professor, good to talk to you, and thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good to have a chance to chat with you. I've always been fascinated with kind of looking back at the golden age of radio. Kind of was always a fan of those shows that whenever I could find them on tape. And this is really even more specific, the advertising start of radio, I guess, in the 1920s. Kind of fascinating how the whole advertising business began, right?
Well, yeah, actually, because radio was the new technology of the 20s, and nobody really knew how to make money from it. And so at first they just started selling radio sets, but broadcasters were putting on free programming, and they couldn't charge their audiences for the programming because, you could get it for free over the air. So it was kind of like the Internet of the 1920s, and broadcasters finally noticed that the people who were willing to pay to reach audiences were advertisers. And so they just started renting the airtime, and then advertisers noticed that they could get bigger audiences if they started providing entertainment. So for the next several decades, the advertisers actually controlled, produced, oversaw shows, and scheduled the entertainment on radio.
It is kind of interesting. I was going to say the same thing. Like the Internet is today, people trying to figure out how to make money on it with content. And I guess television before that, there was a similar kind of thing with TV. People didn't really know what to do with it. But radio was like that in, I guess, the early 1920s. I guess the first station went on, and I think KDKA might have been the first commercial station. So interesting that they didn't really understand how to work advertising then, even though newspapers had been around, but they didn't really know what to do with it.
Well, they had a real challenge because what happened was the advertisers turned to their advertising agencies to oversee the programs, and ad agencies were specialists in print media. They knew how to do a magazine ad, and so then they had to translate those print strategies into radio, which was, an audio medium, and then they had to integrate all those strategies into entertainment, which is not what they were used to doing. And so part of what my book is about is I went back into all these archives, and I learned how different agencies took different approaches to creating programs that were really designed as advertising vehicles, but were also designed to be entertaining and to draw in audiences. So, for example, J. Walter Thompson was an agency that specialized in celebrity associations, and so they always had lots of big stars on all their shows. And then the advertising then was integrated into it, where advertising would talk about how the star uses Lux soap, or sometimes the characters in a program would actually discuss how, what kind of soap to use. So, for example, in the Gibson family, the lady of the house discusses with her maid what kind of soap to use on her face.
And now, before the overture to the second act of the Gibson family, let's step backstage and look in on Sally Gibson and Hilda, her maid, who is helping Sally change for the next scene.
Quick, Hilda, hold this dress. I've never been so excited in all my life.
It's really wonderful, isn't it, Miss Sally?
Too wonderful. That scene in the garden.
It made me think of Henry, Miss Sally. Miss Sally, if I had your complexion, do you suppose Henry would...
What, Hilda?
Tell me what's wrong with my face, Miss Sally. Those red blotches just won't go away.
Soap, probably. What kind are you using? Some beauty soap, I suppose.
Yes, Miss Sally. That one that promises radiant beauty, glamorous youth, irresistible loveliness. Oh, Miss Sally, I had hoped Henry would...
Yes, so did I once. And then I learned the truth. Hilda, you can't feed the pores of your skin with beauty oils or mysterious ingredients.
No.
And many highly perfumed, prettily colored soaps contain fatty acids and free alkali that really irritate and harm your skin.
But, Miss Sally...
My doctor recommended Ivory. He says all any soap can do is cleanse, and that to protect the fine texture and pores, a soap should cleanse gently. And that to do that, a soap must be pure. He said Ivory would help to keep my skin smooth and fine.
And, Miss Sally, do you think Henry would...
Oh, quick, my gloves, Hilda. Is the bell for the second act?
No, Hilda will never get a Grecian nose by using a beauty soap. But we do hope she gets Henry. And now for the overture to our second act. All right, Don.
Some of those old ads that really was kind of worked into the plot of the shows, and you go back to, I guess, the first big star of radio, Rudy Valley. I guess, what was it, the Fleischmann's Yeast Hour? Was that the original sponsor of that? It was
yes,
one sponsor for the entire show.
Yes, and that was a show written by J. Walter Thompson, the agency, and they set up the show as if Woody Allen was actually running the show. But they produced it, they scripted it, they cast it, they chose the talent. It was like a music variety show. And then they would integrate the commercials where, like, Woody Allen would be walking around his nightclub and he would eavesdrop on a couple, you know, talking about something. And, of course, it would turn out in their conversation that Fleischmann's yeast was this wonderful solution for the problems that they were having.
Yeast solved all ailments, I guess, or baking, whatever it was used for back then.
Well, they claimed all sorts of things for yeast, which, of course, actually were not true. But it was one way of getting the advertising in a way that they thought would not annoy audiences too much.
Probably the greatest radio performer and the biggest star at the beginning, I would say. Rudy Valley may be, but I think Jack Benny was the most associated with his products. Jell-O was first, and then later on with Lucky Strike. But he was a master, as writers were, of working the ads into his shows, wasn't he?
Yes, and he was produced by Young and Rubicam. And Young and Rubicam was a soft sell agency, and they didn't really believe in hitting people over the head with the ads so much, and so they interwove them all the way through the shows. So Jack Benny would open his show saying, "Jell-O again, it's Jack Benny." So they would pun on the product, and, you know, Jell-O was a really good product for making jokes about, because it's kind of jiggly and colorful.
Right.
So it was very successful. And then when he moved on to Lucky Strike, his show was produced by BBDO, a different ad agency. And again, they used, like, songs and parodies to advertise the cigarettes. So they were always sort of making fun. But there were other advertising agencies that didn't believe in humor as an advertising strategy, and they resisted it. So another agency called Blackett Sample Hummert was a hard sell agency, and they just believed in long, repetitive ads that just told you about the product over and over again, because they weren't sure that the audience was paying attention. So, for example, they helped invent soap operas, which were these serial dramas, always open-ended, so you tune in tomorrow, and every day you hear 2-minute ads going on and on about how you should buy Oxydol, O-X-Y-D-O-L.
And here's Oxydol known Mar Perkins again, the true life story of a woman whose life is the same, whose surroundings are the same, whose problems are the same as those of thousands of other women in the world today. A woman who spent all her life taking care of her home, washing and cooking and cleaning and raising her family. And now her husband's death hits her head foremost into being the head of the family as well as the mother. And we'll hear her true life story every day at the same time except Saturday and Sunday. Before we hear from our person today, though, I want to tell you about something else for a minute that will be of vital interest to every housewife listening. About a remarkable new laundry soap discovery that actually makes any other kind of laundry soap old-fashioned and out of date. It's the new, improved Oxydol, spelled O-X-Y-D-O-L, Oxydol. It embodies the latest scientific discovery of the world's greatest soap makers, the Procter & Gamble Company. Whatever soap you've been using in the past, whether it's a granulated soap, a soap flake, or a bar soap, you owe it to yourself to try this new, improved Oxydol. For it makes washing easier, gets the washing done faster, and is safer for colors and fabrics than any other laundry soap now or ever known. Here's what Oxydol will do for you under guarantee of the world's greatest soap maker. Oxydol will wash your clothes 25 to 40% faster, whether you use a tub or the latest improved washing machine. It washes clothes 4 to 5 shades whiter by actual scientific tests than any other soap can do, and absolutely without scrubbing or boiling. And remember that even your best cotton prints and your children's daisy frocks are safe in mild, thick Oxydol suds, because it embodies a new discovery which keeps all the fast-washing and white-washing qualities in the soap and leaves all the harshness out. It's safe for colors, safe for fabrics, and yet so kind to your hands that, well, you're simply amazed at its cleansing power.
And that's where the term soap opera came from, was radio. I know people associate that with TV, but it started in radio, didn't it?
It started in radio, and it started with agencies like Blackett Sample Hummert, who specialized in these serials, and they were designed for housewives. And they assumed the housewives were at home cleaning and would be sort of half listening. And so it was very repetitive. And actually a lot of people criticized their soap operas because they thought they were kind of condescending and and obnoxious, but they actually created them that way on purpose because they were trying to keep the attention of the audience who they assumed would be busy doing other things.
You supplied another ad, too, and we're going to play it in a minute. Talking about Jack Benny, another one of the great early radio comedians was Fred Allen, who was known to like to ad-lib a bit. He didn't really like to follow a script, but he would work the ad in occasionally, but kind of make fun of it at the same time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he was also produced by Young and Rubicam, although he liked to complain a lot about his relationship with NBC and Young and Rubicam because they were always wanting to, change his script. And so he would do things like he wouldn't give NBC the script until like 2 hours before the show, and NBC would complain. And they were just really trying to make sure that he didn't offend anybody. So one of the funniest commercials from this period, between 1940, is when Fred Allen and his announcer parody hard sell advertising. In hard sell advertising, they repeat the product name over and over again. And in this commercial, Fred Allen and his announcer, Harry Van Zyl, pretend to forget the name of the product, which is Sal Hepatica. And so they have this long commercial where they keep forgetting it. And yet, I think it's a very brilliant commercial because the audience knows the name of the sponsor, and the audience is thinking it instead of hearing it.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. Someone once said that the world stands aside to make way for the man who knows where he's going. And so tonight it gives me great pleasure to make way for a man who knows what he's talking about. Harry Von Zell.
Don't ever neglect the cold. At the very first sign of a cold, get after it immediately with the faster help of sparkling, what's the name?
Fred Allen, remember?
No. The name of I'm awfully sorry, that eagle has upset me. I can't remember the name of what it is that helps fight colds faster. It slips my mind.
Well, it'll come to you. Go ahead, Harry.
Well, yes, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, this famous product acts very quickly, yet it's exceptionally gentle. And since the progress of a cold is very fast, the greater speed of what it is I'm talking about is especially important in fighting your cold. And that's not all. This, the name will come to me in a minute. It also helps nature counteract the acidity that so often accompanies a cold. And, ladies and gentlemen, you can check these facts with your own doctor.
You'd better check the name, too, ladies and gentlemen.
Fred, you know what I'm talking about.
Why, certainly, Harry. You're talking about America's outstanding saline laxative.
That's it, Fred. And the name is...
The name is, so many physicians recommend it.
Yes, and it helps fight colds faster. But what is the name?
Well, here's a pretty to-do. Wait, Harry, there must be somebody around here who knows. If there is, will you please tell us confidentially? That's it, Sal Hepatica. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
I used to hear that Sal Hepatica. I've heard that was a product before my time, but it's a laxative, isn't it? That was like another cure-all.
Yes. And in this ad, they make all sorts of product claims for it, which I don't think any laxative maker would make today.
Probably not.
In fact, there was a lot of criticism of laxative advertising on radio. A lot of people thought it was a little indelicate, and so there's a big debate over who controlled the programming, because the advertisers were controlling the programming, and the broadcasters were just kind of policing them a little bit, because the broadcasters, as you know, are licensed by the FCC to serve the public interest.
Right.
And so there was a lot of tension over this in the 30s and 40s, and by the time television comes along in the 1950s, there's a pressure to remove advertiser control of programming, but it really doesn't happen until the entire business model changes. Television is much more expensive to produce, and so advertisers can't finance an entire program, and audiences shift away from radio, comedy, music, and drama to television. So radio then becomes recorded music and talk shows and news, which is much cheaper to produce. And so what happens is that the broadcasters take over programming, and the advertisers then just buy, a minute here and there.
So television was the reason that advertising became you buy 2 or 3 minutes within a show rather than sponsor the entire show. Although there were some TV shows that early on were sponsored by one sponsor, like Milton Berle with Texaco, but that pretty much was the end of that, right?
Exactly. Kraft Music Hall, General Electric Theater, DuPont Theater. There were lots of shows. They were very expensive, and it became really clear that they had to change the model. And also, there was a lot of, debate over advertiser control of programming. And when the networks did take over, the advertisers complained that actually they were the ones offering highbrow cultural programming like live theater and classical music, and the networks were the ones offering sitcoms and westerns.
Now, someone who teaches communication and advertising as part of your courses, I think so many people now are so inundated with ads, no matter where you hear them, radio, TV, or even internet. It's almost become a glut of advertising. I know you watch a TV show now, it's about 40 minutes of content, 20 minutes roughly of commercials. The old days, there was maybe 5 or 6 minutes of commercials. So there's almost too much. Are people paying attention to ads?
Well, yes, and actually the biggest challenge is that people are not watching linear or live television as often. And so advertisers are now going back to a lot of these old strategies. They're now integrating their brands into the actual program. They're now creating their own programs. AT&T produced its own teen reality show called At Summer Break. They're now using things like cast commercials, so Modern Family and The Middle, which are 2 sitcoms, had Target commercials, which included the characters from the shows. So a lot of these ad strategies are coming back, in part because advertisers realize that they no longer have audiences' attention during those commercial breaks. And then they have to interweave again.
It almost is going back to the early days of radio with the internet. I mean, it's a whole new technology, even though it's been around a while. But I think the broadcast end of the internet, or content end, is still relatively new, right? To figure out how to make money on that.
Yes, exactly. Because it used to be that when people were just listening to regular radio or regular TV, they had to be in front of the set during the time of the program. And today, with digital media, they can time shift. They can listen to it another time. They can skip over the ads. They can do all sorts of things. And so advertisers realize that they have to find, not new ways, but really a lot of old ways to keep audiences happy and to keep them, attentive, so that the advertising message can still get through.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating book called, again, A Word from Our Sponsor, Ad Men Advertising and the Golden Age of Radio. And we've been talking with Professor Cynthia Meyer today. And Professor, you give out a website. People get a hold of this book.
Yes. It's on Amazon.com. And I also have a website that has some audio clips and some pictures and illustrations. And that's called awordfromOurSponsor.wordpress.com.
Great. Professor, always fun to talk broadcasting, and I appreciate having a chance to read through the book. And please let us know when you have another project come out. We'd love to have you on again.